Take the phone call. Yes.
Hello. How are you, dear friend?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good, fine, thank you. Nice to see you.
Come with Dave McLean.
Dave McLean. Dave just parking the car out the back, yeah.
I'll let you have that envelope.
Oh, right.
For Mr. Stephen.
For?
Mr. Stephen.
Oh, thank you very much, yes.
You did,
Yes. Is Pertwee here?
not yet, no.
No.
You'll know when he arrives. Don't worry.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to Ladies and gentlemen, can we all be seated? There's enough seats to go around. We're going to make a start now because we are running slightly late. I think there should be enough seats to go around. Right, it's going to be very sort of laid back, very casual affair. As you'll notice on the tables, there's some paper and pens. We're going to have a question and answer session later on. So if there's any questions you want to ask, if you write them down, give them to me, and then we'll draw some out of the hat later on, and we'll ask our guests.
Over here. Right.
Where's you can stand there?
That's my good side, isn't it? Well, I've said I have no good side. It's a shame, isn't it? Right. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say it's a delight to be up here, not only because of the convention, of which I was pleased to be able to come up. I should actually have been in Eastbourne today, but that was put off, I think. But we're going another time there, and I'm delighted to say that the sales director of Sunburst Books has brought some copies of the new book up as well, and Keith Baxter's over there. He has some copies with him. In fact, this is the first time I've seen the book today for the very first time. I've just seen it. They've done a smashing job on it. They really have. It's taken 4 months of hard grind from me, but anyway, that's something we'll deal with a little later on. But I just want to thank one or two people. Obviously Nick Randall, who's organised this from this end, and the bloke who's coordinated everything over the last couple of years, and really the society has really taken off. And that's our dear friend Jack Wheeler here. He's done it. Thank you for keeping in touch with us all, and it's been marvellous to see you here. You're looking so good, marvellous. Also, dear Frank Williams, who has come up just today. I think he's going back this evening, unless he gets too drunk. I don't know how to go back tomorrow. But Frank, I've got to tell you now, and Frank won't mind me doing that, is that he has had a problem with his eyesight, which is not easy to travel nowadays. But here he is. He's come up just for the day, and I think, off screen, there were a lot of laughs, and I can tell you a lot of ridiculous situations we got into, which we might sort of mention later on. But they were quite wonderful. You'd hear, Teddy did all the driving, and Frank used to fill the car up with his stuff, so Teddy, all he could take away filming was a little hold-all like that, because everything else was Frank's books and tape recorder and goodness knows what in there, and suitcases, cabin trunks and everything else, which he used to like touring around with. And we always heard this conversation, "Come along now, Teddy, we're a bit late, Teddy, come along." "Well, I'm coming down, don't worry. And I remember driving up the motorway when we decided we'd go a different way at some point. Instead of going round up the M11, or what it was, A11, which we'd always been, we'd go up the A1 and come off at Baldock, go through to Newmarket that way up to Thetford. And I am on the stretch of A1M going up, and there are several cars bunching up, right? And I look ahead in my car, and I see there's a car going quite slowly. I thought, yeah, they're going to get across with this. And eventually I'm able to draw level with this car, and there is Teddy driving at 30 miles an hour with Frank with a vast map of the world in front of him, covering the window screen, covering Ted and everything else. You can see this animated conversation going on. And eventually they did arrive in Newmarket 3 days later, and it was all very good. But those are the sort of things that used to go on. We had a lot of fun in it in those days, it really was. Also, of course, delighted to see, after, he's had a traumatic time over the last 2 or 3 years, dear Colin Bean here. Colin, the other day he couldn't come up, but also someone who Colin, we all knew very well indeed, Hugh Hastings. He sent his best wishes, and he was, of course, one of the people who came in for the first episode and stayed for the whole series. And of course, they both did the film together as well. They did more in the film than I did. I was in and out doing a couple of things as the warden, doing a bit of shouting and off again. And that was it. But they were there for the whole of the film. And I'm sure that finally I would like to thank all of you for coming along. It is marvellous. I have made a suggestion, and we can get some feedback on that, is that 1998, which soon rushes upon you, you know, that in fact we have a convention, because it gives us time then to plan it, at least give Jack time to plan it, and all those people, that we have a convention celebrating the 30 years of Dad's Army, which it will be then. And if, I know this is perhaps not very good for some of you, if we can have it in London, I can definitely get the right venue for it, and we can send out invitations to the people who've been responsible, perhaps. I mean, Will Wyatt, who's managing director of the BBC, I know would like to come. He's a great fan of the show. And also Alan Yentov, who now, I've just had a letter from him saying it's miraculous, it's amazing, and it's something that, you know, we can't really sort of think about in our brains of how the great popularity of Dad's Army. It was a very nice letter. So, and Alan Yentov was one of the people, when they decided to start putting on the repeats and it started getting figures, he was not very happy about it, because it was getting better figures than some of the new programmes. That's a natural thing, but now he's a great fan of it. We can get him along, so I should think we could probably get a lot of mileage from BBC television to cover that down in London, if all goes well. And hopefully, you know, a lot of you will be able to come down for that one. But I think it's something we've got time now to plan ahead. To rush into another one next year we wouldn't perhaps do the same sort of thing or give the same sort of time to planning the one in 2 years' time.
For your granddad, is he a fan as well? What's his name? Ben?
May I say how very pleased I am to be with you all today. It's very nice indeed. And I bring you greetings from His Worship the Mayor and Corporation of Warmington-on-Sea. The Mayor was particularly sorry not to be able to be with us today. But the fact is that last night he had an extra special meeting of the General Purposes Committee. Now, I'm not at liberty to divulge what the meeting was about, but I understand it was going to be a long and acrimonious meeting, and possibly going into the small hours of the morning. I don't know if any of you have seen anything about it in your papers today, or possibly on the media. No? Maybe they're still in session, I don't know. Anyway, the Mayor thought that it would be unwise. He's not as young as he used to be, you understand, and so he thought he wouldn't be able to make it. In fact, his wife said he couldn't come. So that settled it. But as you may, of course, know, I've been retired now as town clerk for some years, but I'm still in close touch with some of my young colleagues who've now grown up, and of course the councillors. And you will be glad to know, I'm sure, that Warmington is still a Tory stronghold. Only just. Of course, in my day, it was practically 100% true blue. There were one or two liberals and things, but not many. And as town clerk, of course, I had to be completely impartial. I just ignored them. But nowadays, I'm afraid we've got all sorts on the council. I mean, Liberal Democrats and Democratic Socialists and Socialist Democrats and raving loony monsters and all sorts of things. In fact, a few years ago, we even had a greengrocer who was on the council and became the mayor. Of course, that was after my time. But I still see some of my old friends knocking about. Only the other day I saw Mr. Jones being wheeled along the promenade. He's a little bit frailer these days, but Mrs. Fox was pushing him. Mrs. Jones was pushing him along. I still can't get over the fact that Mr. Jones picked me to the post. Some say that the better man won, but I think that those little tidbits that Mr. Jones kept underneath his counter, which miraculously appeared whenever Mrs. Fox came into the butcher's shop, had something to do with it. However, occasionally I've been able to give them a little hand as they turn off the promenade, you know, up into the main street. And this little incline there is a little bit much even for Mrs. Fox, Mrs. Jones, splendid woman though she is. Ah, how I recall those happy days when I was sponsoring her to be the Lady Godiva. With those long golden tresses covering her fleshings. A fine figure of a woman. I never forgave Mrs. Mannering for the underhand way in which she locked Mrs. Fox into the ladies' lavatory and usurped the role on that day. Neither did Captain Mannering, I believe. However, yes, and Mr. Pike, I see him occasionally. Of course, he's no longer at the bank. I'm afraid he was made redundant. Yeah, you know, he rather fancied himself as a Clark Gable character. Well, some years ago, a young lady was engaged at the bank who had a striking resemblance to Jean Harlow. Some of you were old enough to remember, just a few of you, Jean Harlow, the blonde bombshell. And Mr. Pike got carried away, despite the fact there was 30 years between them. And he was what is now known as a stalker. It's a good job that the rules hadn't been changed then. In fact, he went beyond stalking and began touching. And as a result, he was made redundant before redundancy had been invented. However, latest thing I hear is that he's been writing his memoirs. Should be very interesting reading. The only trouble is he can't find the publisher to publish them. What else? You'll be glad to know that the Novelty Rock Emporium is still standing there, and Stone's Amusement Arcade. The Wholesome Groom has changed its name now. It's known as the Fraudulent Firkin, I think it is. And alas, the Marigold Tea Rooms were taken over by the Big Mac. Things change, don't they? But there we are. But I'd just like to leave you with the best news of all. Some of you have been to Disney World and Disneyland and Alton Towers and places like that. Warmington are planning to build a super place just on the edge of the town going up onto the downs. And the only trouble is that big money is needed for this operation, and various financiers have come into it and are sticking their oar in. I mean, we were determined that this should be organised and run by Warmington, the council, and so on. But it's becoming increasingly difficult. Mr. Goldfinger and one or two other of these international financiers are determining that they should rule the roost. And although it was intended in the first place to call this Mannering Park, which I think you will agree was a dignified and suitable place, suitable name for such an undertaking. But alas, this wasn't considered good enough. And a school of thought crept in, and the meeting, now I shouldn't be telling you this, but the meeting last night was to try and determine the name of this undertaking. And Captain Mannering had, I'm afraid, got an opponent. And it was suggested that the name should be Hodges Playground. I'm sorry, but I can't go on. Hodges Playground. No, it's too much. No, it's got to be Mannering Park or nothing. So please, if you have any influence at all in financial circles, please write to your MP, write to Mr. Goldfinger or the council, write to the mayor and tell him it's got to be Mannering Park or nothing. So, but please don't tell them that I told you this. This is under the counter. Thank you all for listening. Thank you.